A junior in high school, Jada Williams sat on the edge of her bed with her phone held loosely in one hand, the glow of the screen casting soft shadows across her thoughtful face. She watched message after message scroll past in the group chat for her class's summer celebration, each one more excited than the last. Bright digital flyers showed a stretch of sand kissed by gentle waves, and a sunset so vibrant it seemed painted by an artist's hand. Every name in the list had been tapped to confirm attendance, except hers. An uneasy flutter filled her chest as she stared at her own silence among the lit-up names. She tapped the name of her closest friend, Emma, hoping for a personal invitation. When Emma's reply appeared, it was brief and distant. "I don't know what you mean." Jada's thumb hovered over the keyboard as she weighed every possible response. But the words seemed to vanish before they could form. A sudden hush in the room pressed on her ears and made her wonder if she had imagined the joy echoing from her classmates. The laughter and plans that once felt like a promise of summer now felt like a door closing in her face. Dragging herself upright, Jada padded barefoot to the window and parted the curtains. Outside, the air carried the salty tang of the Atlantic, and the sun beat down on the quiet street. A stray breeze rustled the leaves of a lone palm tree, and somewhere a car radio drifted faintly with a lazy tune. It was the kind of morning that begged for carefree hours on the sand, but the invitation she craved was nowhere to be found. Her reflection in the glass looked back at her, steady eyes framed by taut braids, and she wondered when wanting to belong had become so complicated. Her mother's voice drifted up from the kitchen below, warm and ever encouraging. Jada slipped downstairs, hoping to mask the tremor in her shoulders. Over a plate of scrambled eggs, she tried to steer the conversation away from the party, but her mother noticed the tension in her jaw. Gently, she asked what troubled her, and Jada hesitated. The words were so simple, nothing more than the sting of being left out. But once spoken, they sounded heavier than any wave she had ever faced. Her mother reached across the table, offering a steady hand, and reminded her of every pool meet she had won, every late-night study session where she had shone. "You deserve to be there as much as anyone," her mother said softly. "And if they can't see that, they are not seeing you at all." Clutching that quiet affirmation, Jada headed for the door. She slipped on her favorite denim jacket, one she had painted herself with bright swirls of color, and grabbed her backpack. With each step toward the school's campus, the midday heat pressed against her. Yet she felt a new resolve growing. The dunes at Berkeley Beach lay just beyond the parking lot, their golden curves beckoning. Whether the party was hers or belonged to a narrower circle, she would stand at the shore and feel the tide against her feet. She would show up even if they did not expect her. By the time she reached the edge of sand and surf, Jada heard distant voices carrying over the water. The flicker of beach towels and coolers confirmed the gathering she had seen in photos. For a moment, she paused, imagining the sea could carry her fears away on a single wave. Then she inhaled the horizon and stepped forward with calm determination. If no one had sent an invitation, she would make her presence known by simply being there. Jada felt the warm sand shift beneath her feet as she took a hesitant step toward the cluster of friends gathered around a brightly colored cooler. A ribbon of laughter floated through the salty air, punctuated by the distant crash of gentle waves. As she drew nearer, that laughter faltered, and a line of bodies moved to intersect her path. Arms linked at the elbows, they formed an unyielding barrier that stretched from dune grass to the shoreline. Blanketed in sunlit smiles, their eyes darkened when they spotted her. A tall girl with sleek blonde hair tilted her chin upward and asked in a clipped tone if Jada had an invitation. Jada's heart constricted at the word, as though it were a gauntlet thrown at her feet. She opened her mouth to explain, but a boy with a baseball cap pulled low, laughed and shook his head. He leaned forward, voice light but cruel, saying that certain people just did not belong here. Around them, the cheer of the party continued, as if they were enacting a private ritual beneath the umbrella of summer joy. Jada's shoulders drooped, the weight of their unspoken message pressing on her chest. She imagined sweeping aside their arms or shouting until they stepped aside. But the sound lodged in her throat. She could feel her pulse thrumming in her ears, matching the rhythm of her mounting frustration. Every face in the circle turned away, dismissing her with a glance that burned hotter than the midday sun. A flicker of shame washed over her, mingled with anger so fierce it made her fingers clench. She took a slow breath, forcing her chest to expand despite the stifling atmosphere. With a soft exhale, she straightened her posture and looked those guarding her out in the eyes. There was no pleading there, only a mirror of their own discomfort. Without a word, she pivoted on her heel and walked back across the sand, letting the grains whisper underfoot. As she reached the quieter dunes beyond the group, she paused and turned to face the party once more. Though they believed they had kept her away, the expanse of beach belonged to everyone. She would return, and when she did, they would have to reckon with her presence. The morning air tasted of salt and electricity, as if the ocean itself had inhaled deeply overnight and was ready to exhale a warning. Jada woke before dawn, drawn to her bedroom window by the restless sky. She watched heavy clouds roll in low over the horizon, their underbellies tinged with bruised violet. A distant rumble echoed like a muted drumbeat, and the wind teased the hem of her curtain. Somewhere in the house, a radio murmured its forecast, speaking of a storm cell building out at sea, of gale-force gusts and a rising tide. At school, whispers of the approaching tempest wove through the hallways. But the group chat for the beach celebration crackled with impatience. Some classmates joked about riding waves, others scoffed at anyone who thought weather might ruin their fun. Emma posted a selfie with a circle of friends, urging everyone to come and bring the party. The dismissive tone stung Jada anew, but she felt a flicker of pride in her own caution. Wisdom born of countless hours spent swimming beneath a wide sky, learning its moods. After class, she headed straight for the water's edge, where her coach already waited on a stretch of sand dampened by an early onshore breeze. He wore a dark windbreaker and squinted at the gathering clouds, voice low and urgent. He reminded the swimmers that the ocean did not negotiate. The currents could shift in an instant, and undercurrents could pull even the strongest under. Jada nodded, relishing the way her heart kicked into gear at the promise of challenge. She shed her t-shirt and stepped forward in her suit, each footfall sinking into the cool grit of wet sand. The moment her toes touched the surf, the world shifted. The first waves rose like living walls, curling before they crashed in a thunderous applause. Salt water spattered her face, bracing her senses. With smooth strokes, she dove beneath the cresting swells and felt the ocean's raw strength press against her shoulders. She focused on technique, long fluid arms, powerful kicks. But the sea had its own rhythm. She learned to breathe between the surges, to ride the momentum, to yield, and push back against this relentless force. Meanwhile, not far down the shore, the unauthorized beach party pressed on. Bright towels and colorful coolers dotted the sand as if to mock the darkening sky. Laughter rang hollow against the wind's rising howl. Plastic cups rattled like loose shrapnel. A few glanced toward the water with uneasy curiosity, but most were determined to pretend that summer was a scripted joy, immune to nature's unrest. They hoisted speakers onto dunes and raised their voices above the brewing storm. Jada surfaced for air, chest heaving with exhilaration. She blinked against spray that stung like shattered glass and gazed back toward the party. A tide had already begun to creep inland, washing away footprints and threatening their makeshift oasis. In each churning wave, she saw possibility, an opportunity to use what she loved most to protect those who scorned her. She kicked toward the shallows, muscles trembling with exertion and purpose. She climbed onto the damp sand and wrapped herself in a towel, cool wind whipping her hair. Her coach approached, pride softening his stern gaze. Together they watched the horizon, where clouds now boiled in dark plenitude. Jada felt the familiar mix of fear and triumph, knowing she was ready for whatever the storm would bring. The ocean had shown her its power, and in doing so, had steeled her resolve. When the tide finally turned, she would answer its call. A sudden hush fell over the beach as the wind climbed in strength, tugging at towels and umbrellas and rattling the edges of a speaker that had been set atop a driftwood pile. The laughter and chatter that had filled the air only moments before grew uncertain, voices rising and falling like the restless tide itself. Dark clouds churned overhead, blotting out the sun and casting the sand in a dim, restless glow. In the distance, the surf had transformed from gentle ripples into surging walls of water that collided with thunderous force. Yet even as the storm drew nearer, the group refused to scatter. They clung to their celebration as though it might defy the elements, shouting across the roar of the wind and daring the waves to challenge their summer revelry. One of the boys, brimming with bravado, stripped off his shirt and sprinted toward the water's edge. He called back over his shoulder, urging his friends to join him in a daring race far beyond the safety of the shallow breakers. A ripple of excitement passed through the gathering, and a few more slipped off their sandals and followed in his wake. They dove headfirst into the surge, arms slicing through the salt spray, chasing the thrill of testing their strength against the sea. Their voices carried across the wind, grazing Jada's trained ear, even though she stood farther down the shore, her vision fixed on the roiling horizon and the lithe grace of their movements. At first, the swimmers cut through the water as though it were a placid pool. Their laughter rang out, triumphant and youthful. But as they pressed deeper into the channel, the current revealed its hidden power. Subtle at first, it tugged at their limbs and tilted their strokes off balance. The bravest among them, the one who had challenged his friends most loudly, suddenly faltered. His kicks grew frantic as the surge tugged him sideways, carrying him away from the line of safety. He gasped for breath, mouth tasting only brine, eyes widening in mounting fear. He raised an arm in a desperate wave, a silent plea lost beneath the impact of a breaking crest. Across the sand, panic unfurled like a dark flag. Teens abandoned their towels and coolers, stumbling toward the water's edge in a jumbled mass. Shouts of alarm echoed from dune grass to shoreline, tiny figures pressing forward, despite the wind's attempt to force them back. A girl's shriek cut through the roar as she realized he was no longer paddling but drifting, helpless against the undertow. Some of the others fumbled for cell phones, their fingers trembling in the gale, eyes darting to the lifeguard stand, perched like a silent sentinel on a distant dune. No lifeguard appeared in the window, only the empty chair swaying with the breeze. And still, the boy drifted farther with each passing heartbeat. Desperation took hold as they formed a ragged line of would-be rescuers, stretching arms and grabs toward a figure bobbing far beyond reach. Each attempt met with the indifferent shove of a wave, pushing them back onto the drying sand. Straining against exhaustion and dread, they realized they lacked the skill or strength to mount any real rescue. The sea, gleaming under storm-dark clouds, held him fast in its shifting grip. Guilt and horror rippled through the crowd as they watched helplessly, their summer bravado replaced by a cold dread that this moment would be etched forever in their memories. And all the while, the waves continued their relentless dance, carrying the struggling body deeper into the merciless expanse, waiting to see if any hand would reach far enough to save him. A surge of frantic shouts carried over the wind-whipped sand, snapping Jada's focus from the distant horizon back to the frantic figures clustered at the water's edge. The boy she had seen drifting helplessly was now nearly swallowed by the swelling tide, his flailing arms a tiny signal of desperation against the vast, churning expanse. Without a second thought, Jada tore off down the beach, denim jacket abandoned on the damp sand. Her heart pounded in time with each pounding footfall, but her breathing stayed measured, honed by countless hours beneath the water's surface. Every grain of sand she left behind felt insignificant compared to the life slipping farther from safety. She plunged into the frothing surf just as a towering wave curled above her head. The cold rush of water crashed over her shoulders and stole her breath. But she kicked through the turbulence, slicing forward with powerful strokes. Salt burned her eyes, stung her lips, but she welcomed the sting. It reminded her that she was alive, that she had a purpose beyond the scorn of exclusion. The wind screamed in her ears, threatening to drown out her own thoughts. Yet she propelled herself ahead, trimming each powerful arm reach to cut through the currents. Darkness lurked beneath every crest, a dangerous undertow that could rip a swimmer away in a heartbeat. And yet she dove deeper, when the next wave rose, surfacing mere yards from the boy's shoulder. His face was pale, eyes wide with panic and disbelief as a crashing wave shoved him under. Jada kicked closer, her thighs burning as she closed the gap. She reached out, steadied him beneath his arms, and murmured his name, as if it carried a tether back to hope. Her voice was calm, deliberate, woven from every lesson her coach had drilled into her. Stay composed, conserve strength, establish control. She ordered him to lean against her side, wrapped an arm under his back, and found purchase against the shifting current. For a moment, the water pulled them apart, but Jada adjusted her angle, turning her body to use the undertow to their advantage, riding each swell and trough like a practiced navigator. Every meter back to shore felt like swimming through quicksand. The boy clung to her, his trembling limbs knotting around her torso, and she braced herself against the extra weight. A vicious breaker slammed into them, nearly bending her in half. But she locked her core and rode it out, muscles screaming in protest, even as her will remained ironclad. She pictured the calm blue of her pool at home, the precise rhythm of her strokes in competition, the steady count of her breaths. Those memories fused into a single driving force. Inch by inch, she clawed her way toward the shallows, refusing to relinquish the fragile hope flickering in the boy's eyes. When her feet finally touched the wet sand, she kept her arms locked around him, using the momentum of a final surge to drag them both forward. The beach rushed toward them in a blur of hands and towels, faces breaking into gusts of astonishment. She stumbled onto firmer ground and lowered the boy gently as if laying a precious relic onto the shore. A crash of applause met her as she rose, shoulders heaving, spray still cascading from her braids. The boy coughed, salt water rattling through his chest, then blinked up at the crowd as his heart thundered back to life. They gathered around in awed silence that cracked into murmurs of gratitude and disbelief. Emma knelt beside him, tears mingling with the grainy sand at her knees, whispering apologies she could not voice aloud. Coaches and lifeguards materialized, rushing to take over, but Jada remained poised at the water's edge, dripping and trembling with the weight of what she had done. The same beach that had barred her entry had witnessed her bravery. In that moment, as the wind calmed and the storm clouds parted to reveal a sliver of sunlight, every hardened heart on the shore recognized the truth she had shown them. Courage and compassion belonged to no single race or clique, but to anyone bold, enough to answer the call. A ripple of astonishment spread through the tide of onlookers as someone's phone screen flickered with a live image of Jada cradling the struggling boy against the roiling surf. A dozen devices rose like a chorus of witness statements, their lenses trained on her steady arms and determined face. Within minutes, a clip had been uploaded, first to a hastily assembled group chat, then to a student-run social media page. And by nightfall, it was everywhere. The footage showed Jada's braid-slicked head bobbing beneath breaking waves, guiding the boy inch by inch to safety. And it played on an endless loop that drew tears from strangers and inspired thunderous virtual applause. By dawn, the video had bled into local news coverage. A banner headline hailed Barclay Beach heroine, alongside a slowed-down replay of Jada's final kick into the shallows. Interviews sprang up, the rescued boy's voice trembling as he thanked his savior. Classmates offering stunned testimonials about never imagining the quiet girl who sat by herself in second-period English could possess such resolve. Comments poured in from miles beyond that coastal town, messages of solidarity, pride, and wonder, many addressed directly to Jada. Some urged her school to award her a medal. Others wanted her story to be taught in classrooms as an example of courage rising above cruelty. When Jada walked through the halls the next morning, the current of whispers and sideways glances trailed her like a wake. Yet it felt different this time. Respect threaded through the hush, and smiles bloomed where skepticism once dwelt. Students who had barricaded her away a week earlier offered sheepish nods, their eyes flicking away from the weight of her gaze. Teachers paused mid-lesson to point her out, and even the principal, usually a solemn fixture behind a mahogany desk, welcomed her into his office to thank her on behalf of the entire school community. Assemblies were called, and a hush settled over the gym as Jada stood before peers and parents, unaccustomed to applause, while the principal spoke of unity, empathy, and the power of one brave act to change a tide of prejudice. Social media kept the story alive. Local radio hosts invited her to speak, podcasts replayed her interview again and again, and small news outlets tagged their segments with hashtags like Beach Rescue and Jada Williams. Some commentators seized on the irony of how a moment of exclusion had ignited a movement of inclusion. A student journalist wrote a feature about how Jada's love of swimming, once a private sanctuary, had become a public lifeline. Through it all, Jada remained humble, deflecting praise with a soft smile that acknowledged the high cost of her classmates' earlier cruelty. She spoke of the ocean as a teacher, of the way its depths demand respect, and of how anyone can find the strength to do what is right when someone's life depends on it. As the spotlight gradually receded, what endured was a community changed at its core. Beach gatherings were reorganized with open invitations. School clubs formed around service and inclusivity. Even the group chat that had once excluded Jada now buzzed with messages planning a celebratory cleanup of Barclay Beach, everyone welcome, no exceptions. Jada watched the transformation with cautious optimism, aware that true change requires more than a viral moment. Yet each time she walked past the dunes toward the water's edge, she saw footprints intermingled in the sand. Reminders that the shoreline, like a brave art, has room for every story to wash up and to begin anew. A soft glow of lanterns hovered above the dunes, casting a gentle light across the sweep of sand where Jada Williams stood at the water's edge. The breeze carried the scent of salt and jasmine from the evening's fire pit, mingling with the laughter of a gathering unlike any she had known before. She watched as faces, some she recognized, some she did not, strolled purposefully toward a single message scrawled in driftwood letters at the entrance to the beach. You are welcome here. Beneath that simple proclamation lay the promise of belonging that had eluded her for so long. She remembered the sting of exclusion that had first driven her back from this very spot, the echo of harsh words that had formed an invisible barrier around her. Tonight everything felt different. Lanterns lined a winding path through the dunes, guiding families, friends, and neighbors to a row of surfboard benches arranged in an open semicircle. At the center stood a long table draped in bright cloths, bearing bowls of fresh fruit, stacks of sandwiches wrapped in wax paper, and pitchers of lemonade and iced tea. The warmth in the air was no longer the oppressive heat of a forced celebration, but the gentle warmth of shared joy. As dusk deepened, Jada stepped forward to address the small crowd that had gathered. She found her voice steady, buoyed by the kindness reflected in their eyes. She spoke of forgiveness and hope, of how the ocean had both tested and carried her to this moment. She thanked everyone who had helped transform hurt into healing, every hand that had set aside fear to reach across old divides. Her words drifted over the audience like a lullaby, stirring tears in some and soft smiles in others. Afterwards, a hush fell, for just long enough that the sound of the waves became a unifying heartbeat. Then a little girl, no older than 6, raised her hand with sandy fingers and asked if they could play a game of tag in the shallows. Laughter rippled through the crowd, and soon children splashed at the waterline while parents watched from beach blankets. Strangers introduced themselves as old friends, swapping stories of summer vacations and hometown legends. Even those who had once formed a blockade to keep Jada out now stood shoulder to shoulder with her, their differences washed away by the tides of understanding. A bonfire crackled to life as darkness settled fully over the shore. Flames danced like living creatures against the backdrop of gleaming stars. Someone passed around a guitar, its wood polished by years of use, and soft chords filled the night. Voices joined in, first timidly and then with growing confidence, weaving old hymns and campfire songs into a tapestry of collective memory. Jada watched the flickering circle of faces, each one illuminated by flickers of light and hope. Under the glowing sky, she wandered to the edge of the gathering and slipped off her sandals. Her feet sank into the cool sand, and she allowed the tide to lap at her toes. She thought of every footprint she had left here before, some inked in pain, some pressed in solitude. And now she saw a multitude of prints crisscrossing in every direction. It was as if every person present had etched a part of their heart into the shore. When the last chord faded from the guitar's strings, a hush fell once more, and all eyes turned to Jada. She closed her eyes, listening to the ocean's endless song, and then spoke again in a voice quiet but unwavering. She invited everyone to wade in together at dawn, to greet the new day as one. A chorus of cheers rose up, carried off by the wind to mingle with the waves. Later, as the embers cooled and the final lantern was extinguished, Jada lingered in the lingering glow of possibility. She watched the dunes fade to shadow and felt a calm certainty settle into her bones. The beach had been hers alone when she first dared to stand upon it. Then it had been a place of rejection. Now it belonged to all of them, a living testament to the power of courage, compassion, and the simple act of welcoming someone in. As she walked home beneath an ink-dark sky, she carried that lesson with her, that even the strongest tides can shift, and that every art has room to change.